Bibles to Titus tonight. We're not going to be here long. I know one thing I do know is that I've been spending a lot of time on the road, and in the morning, little Deacon's going to be having surgery over at Batson's, and we'll be there before 6 o'clock in the morning. We've had several people that had surgeries this week. Keith Lewis's mother did finally have surgery this afternoon. She went through surgery fine. She's in room 290 at Anderson's. Jamie Smith had her baby, and they're both doing well. I saw them again today, and they're doing fine. Yesterday, Mr. Sonny had surgery, and Roger Williams had surgery, and Roger's doing fine. And Mr. Sonny's doing fine, and everybody's home. So that's a good thing. Yeah, well, he's supposed to. Now, last I heard, anybody heard from Mr. Sonny today? Okay, so he should be home as well. Okay, so we've just been kind of busy this week, and we're going to be busy in the weeks coming because, as I reminded folks earlier, if you've met your deductible and you have surgery, you're going to have surgery in December before the 31st. And the busiest month the preacher has is December, okay? So we understand that, and we're prepared to do what we need to do. So be in prayer. Pray for me in the morning as I travel. I hope the rain stopped, and we'll be over there early in the morning. In Titus, last time, y'all remember what I talked about last time? It's been 2 weeks ago. You remember I talked about the older folks and how they are to conduct themselves and how they're not to, quit? Right? You never come to a time, Ms. Melanie, where you're supposed to what? Quit. She heard me preach, and the next Sunday night, she quit. Okay? She hasn't quit. She's just taking a break. We're going to put her back to work somewhere. Okay? But there's also some other things that are found in these scriptures. We're in Titus chapter 2 and verse 3, and I want you to see them if you would. It says, the older women likewise, they're to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things. And so we understand that there's some things that the older women are to do, and one of the things the older women are to do is to teach, right? So who are they to teach? They are to teach the younger women. And so we understand that they are to admonish, in verse 4, the young women to love their husbands. They're to set the standard. And so tonight I began to look through it, and we're going to talk to the younger women. And so I looked around, and I began to wonder how many actually younger women we have here. And it's talking about women of childbearing age. And so I thought, okay, what would be childbearing age? Well, it's not just childbearing age, it's childbearing plus child rearing age. So what age would he be talking about? Well, in that day, it was not uncommon for a 13-year-old girl to be married and to be with child. It's also not uncommon because they didn't believe in abortion and they didn't believe in birth control. They didn't know how to do that. For a woman, say 45 years old, to have a child. And so they would raise that child after having a child in their late 40s. For the next 12 years. So we're looking at somebody around 60 years old would be considered, praise God, a young woman, okay? So if you're under 60 years of age, I'm talking to you. And if you're not under 60 years of age, you have children that you need to admonish, right? So we're talking to everybody here tonight, and next week, or in a couple of weeks, I'll talk to the men. And ladies, just know I'm going to hit the men probably harder than I hit the ladies because I know how men think, okay? So, the older women are to instruct. What are they supposed to do? The older ladies are to instruct the younger ladies in what? They are to teach what is good. They are to teach what is good. Now, understand that. What is good is not what we think is good outside these church doors. What society would think would be good, that's not what we are to teach. What we are to teach, and the older ladies are to teach teach the younger ladies what is good, and what is good is found in the Scriptures. How to conduct yourself is found in the Scriptures. How to make decisions are found in the Scriptures. Everything that you are to teach a younger lady, and the younger ladies, the things that you are to be taught, will be found in God's precious and holy Word. So we understand that they are to teach the younger women, and they are to teach the things that are good. What is the purpose behind that? The purpose behind that is to train them. To train them. Well, you say a 45-year-old woman that's raising kids, she's been trained. Yeah, I would say she's been trained. She's been trained by those children. She's been trained by her husband. But she needs to be trained in the things of the Lord. The word train, as you notice it in the Scriptures, is the word self-control. Whenever you see the word trained in the writings of Paul, he's talking about self-control. So you teach someone to be self-controlled. Now, my son is a living experience of a lady, boy, I'm glad she's not here tonight, a little older in life having a child, right? Susan was 39, turned 40 right after Andrew was born, or shortly after. And so she needed to be taught self-control, because a 40-year-old lady with a 1-year-old baby tends to be frustrated at times. Anybody here have a baby when you were 40 or older? 36 or older? 35. Is it hard? Yes. Yes. Well, and that's somewhat of what we're talking about tonight, because you have to be self-controlled. Why you have to be self-controlled becomes the question, because at that age, things begin to get on your nerves. Would you agree with me? Once you get 40 or older, things begin to bother you a little more. Why? Because you're not physically able to do the things you used to do when you were in your 20s or even in your 30s. And so you begin to become frustrated. And so here's Paul, and he's writing to Titus, and he says, Titus, you teach the older women to teach the younger women to have that self-control in dealing with people. So what are they teaching them to be self-controlled about? Be self-controlled when you deal with your husband. Be under control at all times when you deal with your husband. Is that hard? Sam, you need to, I don't know what you're going to do. Is it hard to deal with your husband after you've been married to him for 20 or 30 years? No. See what I'm talking about? So you need to be self-controlled. Why is it important to be self-controlled when you're dealing with your husband? Well, we're going to talk about that. And I need one of the deacons to hold the door open when I run. Okay? So, not only are we going to teach them to be self-controlled when dealing with their husband, but we're also needs to be there needs to be some teaching on how to be self-controlled with your children. Not how to control your children. We know how to control our children, right? The Bible teaches that as well. Spare the rod, spoil the child. The rod of correction to drive a child far from his unrighteousness. And so we know how to control the child. How do we control ourselves? Because there are times when you want to beat your children almost to death, right? Ever been there? Ever done that? So we understand that that actually happens. And yes, Steve, every time I read that passage, I thought about, if you're a foster parent, you cannot spank the children. But as Steve Ratcliffe told me, as a guardian of a child, you can beat them. They don't beat the children, okay? Well, not much, all right? So, look with me for just a moment. We're talking about childbearing age, and we're talking about the things to be self-controlled over, be self-controlled around your husband and around your children, the older women teaching the younger with them. So turn with me to 1 Timothy chapter 5, and let's read verse 9 and following. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 9. Do not let a widow... Now, you want to know how I got these numbers? I'm going to give them to you. Do not let a widow under 60 years old be taken into the number. So if you're under 60 years old, you are considered a young woman in the day of Paul. That's what he's talking about. And not unless she has been the wife of one man, well reported for good works, if she has brought up her children, if she has lodged strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, if she has diligently followed every good work, but refused the younger widows, for when they have begun to grow wanton against Christ, they desire to marry. So here's a widow, and she needs help from the church. And so he sets some guidelines. The first thing the widow must be is under 60 years old. And then he goes through a list of things also that she must do. And there are certain things that she is to do. So we understand the numbers are there, and there are some duties that, those are the duties that they're teaching. So let's look at what it means to love your husband. Go to Ephesians. Let's start there. Go to Ephesians chapter 5. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, chapter 5, verse 25. In chapter 5, verse 25, it says, Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. So that is how we're going to begin this study about women loving their husbands. The first thing we need to know is that the husband must make it easy for the wife to love him. Now, preacher, you said you're going to talk about the women tonight. Well, I am. But I want you to know that these women are looking for husbands that love them, that will do the things that are found in Scriptures and make it easy for the woman to love the husband. Because it's hard to love someone that loves themselves more than they love you. Is that not correct? So you need to love your husbands. And your husbands should set the example and love you with all their heart, all their soul, all their mind, all their body, in that sense. The first thing it says do is love like Christ loved the church. So what kind of church did Christ love? You know, it's amazing to me that we think of the church as being perfect. But the church is not perfect. I mean, we went through the study in Revelation, right? And there were 7 churches, and out of the 7, only 2 of them appeared to be doing what was right. And they didn't do everything right. And there were 5 that were not doing what they should, and 1 that was even called dead. So when you look at Christ and how He loved the church, the first thing about the church we notice is He loved a sinful church. That He loved a church that was not perfect. And so, wives, even though your husbands ought to love you as Christ loved, here's what you need to know. You need to love your husband, and he's not ever going to be perfect. I know that's hard for you to believe, right? It's hard to believe that your husband's not perfect. Any comments? Does anybody here have the perfect husband? Come on. No, you don't. There's not one. And husbands, I really know that you think you're the best thing since ice cream for your wife. But you're not. Okay? Because we are sinful by nature. And we're not perfect people. And so we need to remember that Christ loved the church that was not perfect. And so if He can love us, who are the church, and we're not perfect, we can love our spouses like Christ loved us. And that's the key to it. Notice something else. When you think about the church, not only did he love a sinful church, but how did he love that church? He loved that church sacrificially. He gave himself for the church. He gave himself to a cross. He died for us that we might have everlasting life. And that too is a two-way street, right? And so men, you must be willing to sacrifice for your wife. And if you sacrifice for your wife must be willing to sacrifice for an unperfect husband as well. Even though your husband doesn't treat you like you think you ought to be treated, if he's willing to lay down his life for you, if he's willing to give his life to you for 40, 50, 60, even 70 years, as long as God allows y'all to be together, then you need to be willing to love sacrificially as well. And the older ladies are to teach that. How is the best way to teach that? How do we teach? Well, we teach through repetition, right? We teach through example also. And so our older ladies should be the example that the younger ladies can follow. Not only did he love sacrificially, but he loved protectively. He watched over his church. Yes, there's suffering and there's saints that were crucified and fed to the animals, but he protected the church, and the church is surviving today. And that is the way you are to love your husband protectively. You know, I know one thing, that when you talk about a spouse that love each other, the other spouse is offended. If they hear it, they are offended because they love protectively. They love each other and they want to protect each other. How do you protect someone? It's easy for a wife to love a husband that does the things that I mentioned. Why? Because marriage is about commitment. And so the older ladies are to teach that commitment to the younger ladies. But it's more than just commitment. It is that song again. It's that song from Greece that Olivia Newton-John sings. Hopelessly devoted. We are to be devoted to one another. How? Hopelessly. There's no other. We will protect, we will sacrifice, and we will love until death do us part, and that is to be exemplified in the marriage. The second part of that is you are to love your children. To be children lovers is what that means. Do you love your children? You know, I know there are times that you need to be away from your children. I know there are times that your children get on your nerves. I have two of my own, and I understand that. But I will sacrifice for my children as well. And motherhood is the greatest expression of love that we see on this earth now outside of Christ. The love a mother has for her children. 1 Timothy chapter 2. Look there with me, if you will. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. First Timothy 2:15. Nevertheless, they will be saved in childbearing. If, boy, isn't that something? If they continue, there's a conditional promise. You will be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, holiness, with self, what? Control. And what does that word mean? Training. Training. They will be saved in childbearing if they have faith, love, and holiness, and they're training. They're growing. They're learning. That's what the word means. To control your growth. To control what you learn and what you understand. So we see that. So we see that you love your husband, you love your children. Well, what about remaining unmarried? I wrote that note off to the side. I've got a set of notes here I'm using tonight. It says, remain unmarried means to be devoted to Christ. You know, there's some people that are never married. And that's, you know, on the lady side, there's some that, as the Scriptures talk about, I believe it's in maybe 1 Corinthians. And that's where the church, the Catholic Church gets the nuns, right? They are to remain unmarried. And so they take it from Paul's writings. And so if you are unmarried and you want to devote yourself to God, it's provision made for that in the Scriptures. And so a lot of people have done that over the years. It's also the same thing for the man. But when you come back to Titus, there's a list of things in verse 5. Here's some of the things that you are to actually teach that involve loving your husband and loving your children. To be discreet, chaste, homemakers, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed. And so I went through those words, and that word discreet, in some of your translations will have self-controlled, sound mind, and it's a different word that actually means to be in control of yourself. But to have that sound mind. Be reasonable and be stable, not only physically, but emotionally. Be discreet. It says to be chaste in the New King James, and that word in a lot of translations will be pure. It denotes the word modest, to be modest and blameless. And so I stop there, and you can go to 1 Peter 3:3 and 1 Timothy 2:9 and 10. 1 Peter says you're not to adorn only the outside, but the inside. And in 1 Timothy chapter 2, and I want you to see this, verses 9 and 10, it says, in like manner also, that the woman adorn themselves in modest apparel. Now on Sunday morning, you're going to hear a sermon about that before long. Because what the writers are talking about is that you are to dress appropriately. And here's some of the things that Paul is writing to Titus and says, be sure the older ladies teach the younger ladies how to dress. Now certainly we wouldn't have that problem in a Christian church, right? I mean, ladies, you wouldn't wear a dress that when you sat down, you couldn't pull enough to cover up everything that needed to be covered up, right? We wouldn't do that in Pine Forest Baptist Church. And I always like to use the example, and I've used it here, I think, since I've been back, of the American Baptist Church, I think it is, or the MB Church, where the pastor was having some complaints from some of the older ladies, and that the younger ladies were not dressing appropriately, and a lot of the guys' eyes were popping out of the head. And so the older ladies got together and they made blankets. Y'all remember me telling you about that? And then one Sunday they had a plan, and when everybody came in, and some of these younger ladies would come in with the dresses kind of short, as they sat down, all of a sudden a blanket covered them up. And did y'all ever watch the movies Medea? Y'all ever seen some of those movies? Y'all know what I'm talking about? They had some of those type of ladies throwing the blankets over them. When these young little girls looked up, they wanted to say something, but they knew better. Because they had had enough. And here's what it says in the Scriptures. Dress appropriately for the worship of God. Pretty simple, isn't it? Dress appropriately. Senior adult ladies, teach the younger ladies. And we pass it down from generation to generation. Because it's always better, and I want you to hear me, it's always better for the senior adult ladies to pass it down to their children and their grandchildren than it is for the preacher to get behind the pulpit and say, if y'all don't start dressing better, we're going to throw blankets on top of it. Okay? So that's what we're going to address. Then it says the word homemakers. And we think about homemakers that the lady ought to stay at home and work. I want you to know I don't find that in the Scriptures. I really don't. Matter of fact, I want you to go to the virtuous woman, right? Where's that found? Proverbs 31. Right? Let's all turn there and see what the Bible actually says about it. Because what are the Scriptures? Well, they're our guiding and directing force given to us from God by God. And so, look with me in 31 and let's read verse 13. And let's break it down. She, who would that be? That would be the virtuous woman. Seeks. You know what that means? She goes looking. So it says she goes looking for wool and flax and willingly works with her hands. She goes out into the marketplace. She goes out into the job place. She goes out looking for work. Notice verse 16. She considers a field and buys it. That's not staying at home, is it? Where's the field? Somewhere else. So she seeks the field and buys it. From her profits, she plants a vineyard. So what does that tell us? She's kind of outside the home, right? And she's doing what? It appears to be working. Notice verse 24. She makes linen garments and does what? Sells them. She's making a living. And so as you begin to break it on down, and supplies sashes for the merchants. And so this is an operation. This is a business. She's managing a business. It kind of reminded me, but not all the way, of that old commercial. She goes out and buys the bacon and makes the money to buy the bacon, and she fries it up in what? The pan. Y'all remember that old commercial? Now, the woman that was frying up the bacon wasn't dressed appropriately, okay? But she was working, and this virtuous woman was working, and her husband was made an elder. He was sitting at the gate. So the Scriptures are plural. The word homemaker is manager of the home, which means that every home business, everything that went on, every check that was written, if they wrote a check, you get the drift, they didn't write checks. But the dealing out of the funds, the woman took care of it. Okay? There's the next word is good. She is good. The word is kind. She is kind, she's upright, she's gentle, and she's tenderhearted. And then she's obedient, which means to be submissive. Husbands, if you think your wife is going to be obedient to your every whim and command, you're in trouble. Because it's not supposed to happen. But she is to be submissive to your wisdom and your love, your strength, and your guidance. The word is submissive. To submit oneself to God's divine plan is the definition in the Greek. And then it closes up that the logos of theos should not be blasphemed. Logos is the Word, theos is God. That the Word of God may not be blasphemed. And I'm going to stop right there. Okay?